Welcome, everybody. My name is Andrew Zawacki, and I'm a member of the Creative Writing Program, which is, of course, an entity inside the English department. And on behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to welcome everybody here tonight for the first annual Diann Blakely poetry reading. This should be the fourth annual one. This was going to happen way back in 2020, I think, was the initial start date for this, when Allison Cobb agreed to be our inaugural Diann Blakely poet. And then, of course, the pandemic set in and everything was sent under the rug, and so we're really grateful that you're coming back so many years later to still fulfill this promise. It's great to have you on campus. And Maxime Berclaz will introduce Allison formally in a second, but I have a couple of thank yous I'd like to say that are necessary. First off, I'd like to thank the folks who fund the Diann Blakely Endowment here, which has made this poetry visit possible. And I thought maybe the best way to do that was to tell you a little bit about Diann Blakely herself. She was born in 1957 and died all too early in 2014 at the age of 57, so too young, and a poet with a great deal of promise who was making good progress on her promise. She was a two-time Pushcart Prize winner. She was included in the 2003 Best American Poetry series. That was the year that Yusuf Komunyakaa edited the book. That rotates every year, of course. And she authored 3 different poetry volumes, and then after her death there were a pair of posthumous books published. One was a new and selected poems, and that came out from Salmon Press, and then White Pine in 2018 published a book called Rain in Our Door, which was a series of dialogues with Robert Johnson. She won an Alice Faye de Castagnola Award at the Poetry Society of America. So there was a lot going on in her career, and if you look her up online, you'll find a lot of pretty amazing poems and a couple of interviews with her. And so she is the namesake of this event tonight, and this should be an annual celebration in which we offer a poet to come in from the outside and spend some time with the community and give a public reading, which is happening tonight. In conjunction with that, second of all, I'd like to thank Allison herself, not just for being here, but she judged the poetry contest, a national poetry competition that went in conjunction with this, this week-long celebration. And I'm happy to announce that Marina Greenfield is the name of the poet who won the prize, thanks to Allison. She's from Mississippi, and the poem is called "In Which My Brother's Addiction is a Hurricane." A title that interests me only in part because Diann Blakely's first poetry volume was itself titled Hurricane Walk, so there seems to be some cosmic coincidence happening there, which makes it feel like everything in the universe has aligned itself well. The third of the 5 thank yous I'd like to make goes to Eileen Wallace, who will presumably be building a broadside out of the winning poem. That's part and parcel of the Diann Blakely Award situation. So we should have a material hard copy of the poem printed over in Lamar Dodd in conjunction with her own students, and then that will be digitized in some way so that those of us who can't get our hands on the stuff can still see the poem. Fourth, I'd really like to thank Christine Lasik-White, who is our outgoing / already outgone assistant director of creative writing, who has been on this whole thing for the 4 years that I mentioned before. So this is the culmination of all that hard work. I think that Christine is probably very happy, Allison, that you're an American, in the sense that processing international honoraria is a real pain in the ass. So thank you for being a West Coaster and not, from somewhere else, if I can say that without sounding too xenophobic or something. But thank you, Christine, for sticking with this and for letting Aruni and I and the rest of the creative writing program faculty who wander around with our heads cut off, like chickens, know what's going on with all of this stuff. Finally, let me thank the UGA bookstore and announce that Allison has books for sale out here. What I'm looking at is the poetry, I think mostly 2 poetry volumes. I'm not sure about the creative nonfiction, but buy yourself a copy or 2 copies on your way out. Gift yourself several copies. I feel fairly sure that Allison will be happy to sign copies of those books. But anyway, thanks to UGA Bookstore for being on hand to do all of this. Let me ask Maxime Berclaz to come up. Maxime is a PhD student in the creative writing program. He's a poet himself, and he will do the formal introduction of tonight's visitor.
All right, thank you all so much for coming out. Allison Cobb is the author of Born to, Greenwood, After We All Die, and most recently, Plastic, an Autobiography, which won the Oregon Book Award and the Firecracker Award. She lives in a state corresponding to the first award, but grew up in Los Alamos, where her father was a nuclear physicist. It would be easy to take this biographical detail as the single explanation for the prominent space given to the elements of radiation and weaponry in Cobb's writing. But like Cobb's work more broadly, this resists any singular cause or determination, rather arising out of a complex web of forces, personal, social, historical, and ecological, wherein they're commingling, their identities are swapped, troubled, and changed. Cobb certainly makes use of the autobiographical, but this is both as one register and one area among many. She intertwines the mode of personal recollection with the voice of a scientist, a historian, a journalist, an activist, a queer and feminist perspective, an etymological desire that undergirds the whole of her language. These varied registers work to decenter any particular point of speech, allowing not only for a range of presences, but also for gaps, absences within words where an outside can sneak in and flourish. This is true of it also as subject matter. Along high school memories, the descriptions of chemical processes mingle with Taylor Swift lyrics, the lives of egrets and monk parrots, the wreckage of 9/11 and the bones of the American Revolutionary War. To the extent that it is possible within language, the privileged space accorded to an individual subjectivity is undone, and along with the centering of anthropos. In this, what is perhaps most striking is how Cobb parallels in a specific way her own description of Darwin, whose gift was his obsession for details. Cobb goes beyond simply alluding to a thematic or demonstrating a formal principle. Rather, when she begins, she articulates it fully, unfurling it to the root, only to reveal that still, here, there is far more that can be unfolded, jumped to, laid over, a weaving in all directions. Nowhere is this clearer than in her persistent etymological investigations, that even as they expand the words in question, also highlight how inadequate origin is to explain a meaning. No matter how intensive Cobb's details only assume their proper fullness as they accumulate alongside other streams, forming dense and variegated geological layers consisting of a host of materials. Of course, prominent among these materials are corpses, whether these are those in Hiroshima or Brooklyn. Cobb shows as the world as one where the bodies of animals and plants alike are stacked as kindling to feed an engine of perpetual war, where oceans of chemicals and plastic are both a waste product and a structural necessity, and where our very being as we know it has been formed and depends upon the continued reproduction of these social relations. Yet Cobb does not lapse into melancholy or guilt. Instead, she calls for a way that is not war, a way that is evident from the multiplicity of her poetry along with the openness of it. We are faced with the world of death, not only of death but of extinction, but the poems do not look away, and more that in their very form, along with the words themselves, point in a whole lot of other directions. Please welcome Allison Cobb.
Wow, that was so wonderful, Maxime. Thank you. What a gift. My goodness, what a gorgeous, gorgeous introduction. Hi. I'm gonna mess with this for a minute. How am I sounding to you all?
Legible.
Thumbs up and legible. That's the hope. Okay. Well, I have a lot of gratitudes to thank you so much, Andrew, Looney, Christine, where's Christine? Right there you are, for bringing me here, and also Maggie Zawacki in absentia, who asked me to come so many years ago. It's just such a gift to get to come and be treated with such care and kindness, and to meet so many of you here at the university. I've never been in Georgia before, so it's really just such a treat to get to be here and meet you all. I also want to thank Diann Blakely, because I was not familiar with her as a person or her work, and now I get to stand here and we all get to be here together thanks to her generosity and her creative spirit that is very much still here. So maybe we can just have a minute where we breathe the presence of Diann, who is living here with us in this gathering. Such a gift. Okay, well, I'm going to read a little bit from the book Plastic and Autobiography, and then some more recent poems. I spent like 10 plus years writing a book that's got research in it and a lot of travel and different lives in it, and along the way I was finding relief from research-heavy writing by writing poems, so I've had those two going at the same time. So I'll just read, I'll just read the introduction from this book. I want to thank Eliana too. I don't think she's here, but she also did a lot of work to make it possible for me to come. The things that need organizing and, that stuff. So gratitude to her too. So this book starts with an epigraph from the writer Rebecca Solnit that says, I wanted to trace the lost patterns that came before the world was broken and find the new ones we could make out of the shards. The thing turned up in a corner of the yard just outside the fence. I found it when I went out to take Quincy for a walk. Curved and black, plastic, 4 feet long, a foot at its widest. I thought at first it was a car bumper. I put it in the grass by the porch. The next morning it was still there. I sat next to it in the sun and looked closely. It was not the first piece of plastic junk I had sat staring at. For nearly a year, I'd been picking up all the plastic I found on my daily dog walk. I'd been arranging it into patterns, taking photographs. I'd been storing it all up in plastic garbage bags on the back porch. I didn't know exactly why I was doing this. I wanted to understand something. Plastic on the dog walk, plastic on visits to the beach, plastic studding the ground everywhere I looked. I gathered it all up. I am the no and the yes. A line from the poet Hannah Sobelman's first book. It has lived with me for years, sometimes whispering through my mind in its old, remembered rhythm. In the poem, Sobelman follows the line with a qualifying phrase. She narrows it, makes it domestic. But I want the raw declaration hanging there on the turn of itself. I am the no and the yes. For nearly half my life, I've worked for an environmental group. I spend most of my days in front of a computer screen, taking in a deluge of information about planetary trauma and emergency. Most of it floods through me, too vast to grasp. But plastic was a shard that stuck. Plastic I could touch, and it could touch me back. On this day, as I sat beside the car part, I was thinking about the German philosopher Martin Heidegger, his essay called The Thing. His book, Poetry, Language, Thought, had sat on my shelf unopened for more than a decade since graduate school. A few days earlier, on a whim, I picked it up. Heidegger writes that distance disappears and all things come equally close because of technology. In 1949, when he wrote the essay, he meant airplanes, the radio, TV. These inventions bring everything before us in image and sound. Ancient Egyptian pyramids, a cat in Japan, glaciers shearing off into Arctic waters. Everything flattens out, a uniform distanceless, as he calls it. But this does not make anything present. The only way to approach a thing, to bring it near, is by sidling up to it, by thinking around or through what appears obvious. He performs this kind of meditation on the thingness of a clay jug. I thought of meditating on this car part. It had a smooth surface, shiny. One side was flecked with light splash marks from mud or paint. It formed a complicated shape with wide at one end and tapered at the other with holes and slats and ridges all along its length. The widest end contained deep score marks, some scratched all the way through the plastic. It was stiff but still pliant. Without the car body to hold its curved shape, it folded in half, like a wing, at its narrowest point. The image that came to me was an albatross carcass bursting with plastic. That was the first shard that stuck, a snippet in a news story about a piece of plastic from World War II found inside a dead albatross chick 60 years later. It stayed in my mind for years, like the no and the yes. I drive the car part inside the house. Nearly 10 years later, it sits beside me near my desk. I learned this, that the world is not broken, or that it has always been shards, kaleidoscopically interwoven, not one world, many, threaded through one another, like fungus hyphae through soil. Worlds end. As Catherine Yusuf points out, in a billion black Anthropocenes or none, some worlds have ended over and over, lives consumed and discarded by individuals woven into systems that give them life and death power. Like settler colonialism, like capitalism, these are systems built by humans, but they exceed individuals. They extend across generations and geographies, planet-scale forces of destruction. Plastic waste stems from this consume and dispose violence. I learned that waste is not an unintended consequence of a miracle new technology. Waste is inherent in plastic production as it accelerated after World War II. In 1945, days before the US military incinerated 2 cities with atomic bombs, a DuPont executive looked forward to the end of the war and the surge of buying that would follow as soldiers returned home and bought houses and cars, washing machines and refrigerators. The job ahead, he told a group of marketing experts, see to it that Americans are never satisfied. Plastic embodies this infinite desire. Conjured out of gas and oil, the seemingly endless reservoirs of dead plants and animals underlying Earth, plastic transmutes death into eternal life. The word plastic refers not to any specific object, just the quality of a material, that it is capable of taking shape, an endless stream of shapes. Objects formed from plastic ease suffering and save lives. Artificial hearts, IV bags, the tube snaking out of a respirator. Plastic makes cars safer, airplanes lighter, and delivers drinking water. The single largest use of plastic, though, is for containing other objects. 40% goes into packaging to be used once and then discarded, driving endless demand for more. Companies work to keep these facts hidden. When the evidence becomes too overwhelming, plastic clogging roadsides, oceans, living bodies, companies shift responsibility onto individuals through things like anti-littering campaigns and ensure that taxpayers and municipalities pay the tab for managing the waste. The lives harmed at every step, human and non-human, drop out of the equation. The same consume and dispose violence threads through me also. It has benefited me my whole life. I grew up the daughter of a nuclear physicist in Los Alamos, the town that built the atomic bombs, which ended some lives in order to save others perceived to have more value. We are woven into the same net, me and bombs and this car part. For a decade, I followed threads that tie us together through airplanes and sailors, the hydrogen bomb, Pacific Islands, the Nazis, and Heidegger. I followed threads through silence, loss, and grief, through the birth of chemistry and the invention of radar, through patriarchy, empire, and chattel slavery. I followed threads through apologies and their failure, through a pandemic and an uprising, and living lungs struggling to breathe, through old wounds and new ones, hurt reverberating, aching to be remembered. This object, a book and its journeys, this broken down car cart, its life. This is my no. I've wanted this car cart and its entanglements, often ugly ones and painful, to leave me. I have wanted not to have to face in my privilege the terms of its existence. I learned this. There is nowhere to go. The same terms that made this piece of plastic made me, my own body, and each of my breaths. This is also, it must be, my yes. So that's the introduction. So the book in part charts my journey to try to return this car part to its place of origin. It turns out, after some research, I discovered it comes from a Honda Odyssey, the first model of Honda Odyssey made, which was great for a poet, the Odyssey. So with Cobalt, my spouse, and our daughter, we took a cross-country trip to Lincoln, Alabama, which is where all the world's Honda Odysseys are made, and attempted to return the car part to the factory. I still have the car part, so you can guess how that turned out. But you have to read the book to see what happens. I sometimes bring the car part with me when I read. I actually have put it into a roller bag before and brought it along. This time I didn't do that. It's not very attractive. And also, I've seen a bunch of them since then. Like just the other day, I tripped over one on the street and I sent a little joking text picture to my friend like, uh-oh, I have to write another book. I also usually like skip over the Heidegger section in the introduction when I'm reading, but I figure I'm at a UGA audience, so I can read about Heidegger. So I thought I'd just read one more section from the book and then like 3 new poems. The book is full of, if you haven't read it, it's very short sections, like each section is maybe 3 pages. And so I'll just read this one section called Sorry. It refers to a friend of mine named Yukio Kawano, who is a visual artist in Portland, Oregon, where I live, a gorgeous visual artist. She is a 3rd-generation hibakusha, or survivor of the atomic bombing in Hiroshima. And we have formed quite a bond based on the intersections in our history, and we collaborate and perform together. So there's some reference to that. Yukio said she wanted to ask me about apologies. We had met to talk about grant applications, plans to collaborate, usual stuff. We had finished up the business and I needed to leave. I was in a hurry, as always. But Yukio said, I want to ask you just one more thing. She talked about another poet she worked with on a project regarding the poisoning of the Willamette River here in Portland with PCBs and other industrial chemicals. Yukio suggested to this poet, a white woman like me, that she might apologize to the river, to the Chinook salmon, to native communities, all harmed by white colonizers. The woman said she couldn't. She said there is not a word in her language for that kind of apology. Yukio wanted to know what I thought about this. We spoke about apologies and what they mean, about how the word sorry can be used to manipulate others or evade actual accountability. We talked about what an authentic apology might be and what it might accomplish. Yukio resisted the idea that apology might need to accomplish anything or anything we could measure. What if it's just something that happens inside, a way of being, she asked. We talked about existing as both victimizers and victims and all the ways those states reverberate through our lives. I've benefited my whole life from money that supports nuclear weapons. It paid for every bite of food that entered my mouth as a child, every piece of clothing on my back, all my security and privilege. Yukio asked me, would I, if I were performing in Los Alamos, apologize to all those displaced and harmed by the nuclear lab? Something in me contracted against this. It felt impossible. I'd have to apologize for, well, it would be a global apology, I guess, for everyone harmed all around the world by nuclear radiation, to all beings. Yukio then told me something I hadn't known about her partner, Yute. His grandparents came to Cambodia to escape both the Japanese Imperial Army and the Chinese Communist Party's brutality. During the Vietnam War, when Yu's mother was 12, the US bombed her village in Cambodia. A bomb hit her school and she saw classmates die. Every time I am with Yute's mom, I feel sorry inside, said Yukio, for all she suffered then and since. I am in a state of being sorry. I asked her if she'd ever considered speaking her apology. She said yes, I almost feel ready. We've been building more and more trust. And that's when it struck me. I've been sitting here with this friend I love right in front of me, speaking intellectually of global apologies for nuclear technology, and never once considered apologizing to her, not in all the years we've known each other. I sat up straight in my chair and forgot to be rushed and impatient. Yukio, I said, I'm sorry. Your family has suffered so much from nuclear weapons and war. You've lost your mother, your uncle, your aunt, and had such hurt and fear in your family and in your own life. Yukio, she looked in pain. Tears came up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. I put a hand on her arm. Tears came up in me also. I didn't fully know what to say. I fumbled. It's not as clear as I'm writing it here, but the words came out from my body, my heart, and my guts, not my head. I felt it all through me, that state, the state of being sorry. It hurt because it required really seeing Yukio and knowing and feeling how she has suffered. It required seeing myself also, or feeling myself and the harm my privilege carries. It felt like release, like something broke free in me. We sat looking at each other, a little overwhelmed and stunned, a little awkward. Someone interrupted and pulled us from the moment, which was probably a relief to us both. Later, Yukio wrote me this email. Your apology came by total surprise. Maybe it surprised you too. I didn't have time to prepare its coming. Thank you, Allison, for being so raw and so real. We are really present at that moment, even as the rest of the world was worrying about tomorrow or angry about yesterday. My feet were completely grounded, and your eyes are my gravity. Yukio told me in the moment, thank you. She did not offer forgiveness, and I did not ask for it. It was a way of being kind of apology. Thank you. So the book goes on. I want to say about my friend Yukio that she's brilliant and very pointed. There's a few undercurrents that didn't get into that text, which is that we did perform together in Los Alamos, which is a thing I thought would never happen. And so she was kind of asking that retrospectively of me. And also I had been asking her for help because I had this idea, which I have never executed, maybe for a number of reasons, where I thought I would write a poem about apologies using the phrases for I'm sorry from a bunch of different languages. And so I've been talking to her about that and asking her for the Japanese translation of I'm sorry. And so she was pitting me a little bit in that moment, which she does, which I really am grateful to her for. She is a total force of nature. And that led in the book to a kind of an ongoing thread about apologies as that idea of apologies being a way of being. I read this scholar on apology called Aaron Lazar, who talks about apology being like a long-term commitment, like a relationship, but one that can be arduous and uncomfortable. Like it's not easy. Being in contact with each other in that way is not always easy. And that's one thing I really love about my friendship with Yukio is that it's not always easy. We're often running up against our cultural differences, and it's just beautiful. So kind of on that theme, I thought I'd read some poems from this recent manuscript called Contagion, which seems like it refers transparently to the recent pandemic, but really I was thinking, I loved, Maxime, what you said about etymology is desire. Is that how you phrased it? Etymological desire. Oh, I love that. I totally relate to that. I feel that. I always have this longing to just get underneath and see what the roots of words are to help sort of just to understand what's happening in the language. And so the etymology of contagion is, okay, this is Latin. I don't really know how to pronounce Latin, and I don't see Kelsey here who's telling me that she studies Latin. It's 2 words, com, which means together, and I think it's pronounced tangere, to touch, T-A-N-G-E-R, is that, yeah? Okay. Yeah, it's com and tangere, to touch together, which I just loved. And so this manuscript is actually just trying to think about the ways we belong to one another, which are beautiful and joyful and also so painful. And I felt like all of that was so raw, has been so rawly on display in every part of life in the world, and with the pandemic. So although this manuscript doesn't deal explicitly with the pandemic, it lives, as we all do, under its sign right now. How are you all? Thanks for giggling at me. I think I can be kind of funny, but my topics are a little dark, so.
It's a good contrast.
Yeah, sometimes people are like. My second book is about a cemetery, and my third book is called After We All Died. I was talking to my mom while I was writing the second book, and she was like, honey, you spend all your time in a cemetery, I'm worried. Mom, it's the most alive place in Brooklyn. It was 500 acres, a beautiful open space. It's like, you don't understand. After We All Died, which is out there, is a book that I wrote. So I stopped writing this plastic book halfway through because I got very depressed. I'm tired of seeing plastic everywhere and picking it up. So I stopped and wrote very quickly for me, because I take years often to write books, this poetry book, After We All Died, which is kind of my environmental lament book. But I also think it's funny. Okay, speaking of my mom, this poem is called Catch, and it makes reference to the fact that when I lived in New York, I was on the subway underneath the towers when September 11th happened, when the plane hit. I'm fine. I was able to leave the area, but it does make a reference to that. Catch. What moment did she die? We couldn't tell, my dad and I. No sign or light. We stood beside her, bird-like, curled. We hold that hard gift close between the us that makes us selves, who stood beside. It is a moment, breath, and then it stops. That's real. Declare the time. We had a clock there, red with numbers. Mom. She left before. I held her hand. No living touch came back. She left before her breath. I never, past self, would have written this. Naive, I thought, to cling to souls like characters in books. We're bones and flesh and maybe light, I thought, no more. We just disintegrate to light and dirt. We do, I think, but Mom, that one specific form remains, or did, or does. Hi, Mom, I joking, half say hi. She says it back, but not in speech. She's here. She's not in speech or space or words crunch bone, too animal, too fixed, but she communicates in feel force. 9/11 anniversary, when I woke to that old grief, I felt her soft around embrace. Much earlier, days after she had died, my dad went cycling through guilt for all the things he'd failed her in life. The ice he left in the drive, she slipped and broke her shoulder. He sped down the freeway as he spoke his litany of regret. I rode behind him in the sun along the river. Fast force then, I felt her shake it off as nothing, like a fly on horse flesh. It's nothing. Flick it off. A shake, and then a leap, like joy. I knew my sister felt it too. My dad, too sunk in self, in grief. I feel just joy from her. My sister said it gently and with love for all his hurt. But I felt something else, her bursting, fierce impatience for our joining her in joy. It crackle, sparks, it says, catch up. Okay, this is called Make a Living. It's got etymology in it, of course. To make a living, alive, not dead, the dictionary says. A pre-English word. To be left, to live, of fire, to burn. From an even older root that means to stick, adhere, and with that sense of hanging on, each morning's pre-work, nauseous darkness, exhaustion deep enough to snuff out fire from eyes beside the freeway holding out a sign. I look and look away. I pay a month of groceries for boots I hope will bring me back to life. They don't. They hurt. A hurt that burns through tissue to tendon and bone, slow-fired nerve fibers sparking. My love asks if I've seen a living tree hold fire. It burns alive for years, how the fetal pulse of blood carves grooves in soft skull bones, often mistaken later for fractures, the break of beating life. Not a metaphor, but for the ways medicine sickens the body in the startled response of late capital. Trees don't burn alive for years. At least Google gives me no evidence for this, but coal seams do, and tires, and money burns its need inside the 4-year-old, whose eyes aglow with TV light, says, "Mommy, Mommy, can I have that magic talking grill?" The World Trade Center burned for 100 days, a funeral pyre of empire, which means a span of earth and all who dwell there subject to another's power, drifting molecules through our nostrils down into lungs to add to the blood's toxic cargo. I love you, I said, with eternal flame, like Baba Gurgur, the oil field in Iraq, alive with fire 4,000 years or more, long believed the world's largest lake of fossil life, its dagger of light said to favor pregnant worshippers with baby boys. By you, I mean, my love. By love, I mean, I'm glad, my love, you survived being female and queer, the force of hands and sticks on skin and forced inside, and then erased by those who birthed you. I'm glad, I said, which comes from the root for shine, as in a light with the fire of joy that we can live in love in the factory farm of capital as cattle, which first meant any form of property, as opposed to debt, which means to take endlessly. I said, I'm glad. I'm glad I survived the burning, falling towers. I lived in a fog of privilege my whole life, blurred by a belief in my own exceptional security and the violent fathers who nurtured me. I know now what it is to hold the burn of terror from to tremble, to extinguish the myth of safety, to choose to live in the flame light anyway. Thank you. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for coming. It was such a delight. I appreciate it.